The Clayton County District Attorney's Office hopes to have a decision soon on whether to reopen a 46-year-old rape case. DNA now indicates they prosecuted the wrong guy.
Now, the Fox 5 I-team broke the story of Terry Wanzer, a Georgia man who has never stopped insisting that he was innocent. A Fox 5 I-team reporter Randy Travis returns with new details, including his interview with another Georgia man who says he's willing to provide DNA to clear his name as well. Randy?
That's right, Rosenson. Yeah, all the people involved in this case were teenagers in 1973, including the victim. Well, now in their 60s, they spent a lifetime chased by the same nagging question: who committed this crime?
You're really on my ear.
They first met in a prison chapel in 1981. Terry Wanzer hoping to prove he was not a rapist. Polygraph examiner Dixie Foster determined to get to the truth.
And after about 30 minutes, this overall feeling came over me. It ain't him.
Wanzer would pass that lie detector test, winning early parole after serving 8 years of a double life sentence. He eventually won a full pardon for reason of innocence. State investigators deciding he was not one of the two men who had abducted a teenage girl late one night along I-75, took her to a remote area, and repeatedly raped and sodomized her. The victim had picked Wanzer out of a photo lineup. He would be convicted solely on her testimony.
She got the wrong person. She's done picked out the wrong person.
But prosecutors in Clayton County still had doubts, largely because the victim in their case maintained Wanzer was one of the two rapists, even after the Pardons and Paroles Board decided otherwise. That's why the rape conviction remains on his record today.
And I was going to go on with my life. That didn't happen.
Decades later, new technology finally allowed investigators to analyze sperm from two different men left on the woman's clothes that night in 1973. The Innocence Project paid to compare Wanzer's DNA to those samples. Wanzer remembers the day last November when his attorney called with the results.
He said, Mr. Wanzer, the DNA test came back that I couldn't have possibly committed the crime, and I got all tore up, and I couldn't think, breathe, and I hung up on him.
Terry Wanzer is eliminated as a source of the semen sperm DNA. Terry Wanzer is asking the Clayton County DA to file a motion setting aside his conviction, wiping his record clean for good. But there's another decision facing prosecutors here. Should they reopen the criminal case? Because if Terry Wanzer did not commit that rape, someone else did.
I just believed he was guilty because a jury convicted him. I know now that was kind of naive.
Amber Samples headed up that Pardons and Paroles Board investigation of Wanzer's case in the early 1990s, work that eventually got him his pardon for reason of innocence because of a tragic mistaken identification. In that pardon, the board wrote that two of Wanzer's schoolmates had surfaced years after the crime as potential perpetrators and took polygraphs. The results indicated both were deceptive. Amber interviewed both men as part of her investigation, even though by that time, according to the pardon, the statute of limitations prevented further prosecution.
And that's why the two took the polygraph. It's because they knew they couldn't be prosecuted anyway.
One of those men has since died. The other is Robert Payne, now 63 years old. He told the Fox 5 I-team he's ready to finally get this behind him, too.
I didn't have nothing to do with it. I ain't trying to hide nothing. I'll be glad to take a DNA.
You think Terry's innocent?
No.
Well, the DNA shows that he didn't do it.
Well, I don't know what the hell went on. I really don't.
But someone out there raped that poor girl. Two people did. DNA says it wasn't Terry Wanzer.
Sure wasn't me.
In 2010, the General Assembly passed a law allowing prosecutors to reopen any past rape case if DNA can identify the perpetrator. Now retired, Amber Samples says she never again worked a case as important as Terry Wanzer's. And she thinks there's still more work to be done.
Do you think they should reopen the criminal investigation?
I wish they would, because I think Terry deserves that.
The decision is solely up to the Clayton County DA's office. I'm told they hope to have an answer within the next 2 weeks. One factor they must consider, though, even with the DNA evidence excluding Terry Wanzer, the victim in their case still believes she identified the right man. So it's complicated.
It is, especially because DNA is like the gold standard for evidence.
It really is, and Terry Wanzer has been pushing for the DNA for decades now. In fact, he asked the Pardons and Paroles Board to check his DNA back in the early 1990s, and they said, okay, you got to pay for it. He said, okay, I will.
And back in those days, even with his DNA, they still couldn't compare conclusively his DNA to the samples that were left behind by the two rapists. Now the science is better.
Right.
We're talking about almost 30 years now, and so they do have samples they can compare, and it's excluded Terry Wanzer as a source of that DNA. So now, is there someone else out there? And you heard Robert Payne say, I'll submit my DNA. So now it's up to the DA's office to decide, do they take him up on that offer? Do they need to get a search warrant? Do they want to reopen the case? Because the victim says she thinks the case is closed.
Well, as you point out, there is someone else out there, because if it's not his DNA, it's somebody else's.
Someone else out there, alive or dead.
Right. Randy, thanks.
Thanks, Randy.
Okay.